My name is Mark Schilling. I'll be doing the commentary for this track for Hana-bi, filmed by Takeshi Kitano. It was premiered at the Venice Film Festival in 1997, where it won the Golden Lion, the highest prize, and it was released in Japan in January of 1998. At that time, I was a reviewer for the Japan Times, the oldest English language newspaper in Japan. And I had a chance to both visit the set of Hana-bi and also to interview Kitano about the film. And of course I reviewed it. I gave it a very high rating, as most people did. I believe it's the probably best reviewed of his films to date. Most critics liked it. The audience liked it. It became a hit in Japan. One of his first films to really connect with a broad audience. It's, in a way, a culmination of everything he had been doing, since becoming a director with Violent Cop in 1989. Hana-bi was his seventh film. He'd made, of course, Violent Cop, Boiling Point, 1990, A Season at the Sea, 1992, Sonatine, 1993, which is his international breakout. It was sold at the Cannes Film Festival. I remember going there, talking to the people at the booth at Shochiku, the company that was selling it, and they told me very frankly they didn't have very high hopes for it because it had a rather controversial history in Japan. The producer, Kazuyoshi Okuyama, kind of disowned it, had a controversy in that way, and also didn't do very well at the box office in Japan. But it was picked up and screened by Tony Raines, a British film critic in London and elsewhere. Became very successful critically, and that was basically his international breakthrough. And then after that, he made a film called Getting Any, which was a comedy. And then he had a very severe accident. He was on a motorbike, fell off, nearly died from that accident. He was in the hospital for weeks. Half his face was paralyzed. And Kids Return, 1996, was his comeback film. And then after that, he made Hana-bi. So my feeling, again, after having seen all of these films, was that Hana-bi was something different, something that put together everything he'd learned about filmmaking in the past 7-8 years. And when I interviewed him, about the film, he said, that was pretty much the case. There were some things about the film he liked, some things he didn't like, but he said to me, I gave it a passing grade. For me, it was a success that way, personally with the success.
かみさん具合どう？もう2年ぐらいになるよね。うちみたいに元気すぎるのもなんだけど大変だよね。最近病院行ってないでしょ。今日の現場は病院近いんだからちょっと行ってきたらどう？いいよいいよ、どうせどうってことないんだから。いくら？1200円です。お前まんじゅう以外に何か買っただろ。いや、まんじゅうだけですよ。バカ野郎買いすぎだよ。3人でどうやってくんだよこれ。お前払っとけよ。はあ。これじゃなかったんだよな。あっただろ中に栗の入ったやつ。
The film critic Roger Ebert compared Hana-bi to Death Wish, the film starring Charles Bronson on a mission of revenge. It does have that hard-boiled feeling to it, especially at the beginning, but it is not really that sort of movie. It's really about the hero Nishi um, going on a trip with his wife. Uh, it's a road movie that way, and it's also a different kind of friendship movie. Not really a buddy movie. You have Nishi and Horibe, his partner on the police force, their relationship. And it is, of course, also about a procession toward life, toward death. It's very complicated to analyze, but I think it's one of the easier films to watch and understand. You can see it as, again, like not quite an entertainment film, but a film that can be, relates to these very familiar motifs. Again, the road movie, the movie of friendship, the movie of a man coming to terms with his wife's fatal illness. You have all these different themes. In the beginning, it's a police drama. You have these cops on a stakeout. Nishi is, of course, with them. He's, waiting for something to happen here. See these two guys playing baseball on the street. Bit of a comic interlude.
じゃあ俺残りますよ。
いいよ。田中さんとこ女房も子供もいるし。お前3時間ぐらいいいじゃねえか。ダメですよ。
One thing emphasized in the from the very beginning is the color blue. Everything seems to be blue. From the first shot of the sky, the color of the car, and so on and so on. That became his trademark, or by this time it was his trademark, called Kitano Blue. It has meanings, different meanings you can interpret in different ways, but it's can be a dark color, indicative of depression, even death, or something more cheerful.
分かってるよ。しょうがねえじゃないか仕事なんだから。みっちゃんとちょっと代わって。あ、みっちゃん、パパ。
Things very quickly turn serious. You have the men on the stakeout. Things go wrong with that. And then you have Nishi going to the hospital to see his wife, who is dying of a terminal illness. One thing that is not mentioned yet, but has a big effect on their relationship, Nishi's relationship with his wife, is of course the death of their daughter. That is such a big shock that Nishi's wife becomes essentially mute. She doesn't say anything, in the course of the film. And Kitano talked about how he wrote the script when he was thinking of how to structure the film. His idea was, the wife says nothing all the way through the film. And then at the very end, she says, arigato, thank you. And then later, he added another word, gomennasai. But basically, she's mute throughout the film. And when I first saw it, I wondered exactly why, what's going on, and why doesn't she say anything? The film does not really explain. In fact, it doesn't explain a lot at all. This, again, was Kitano's method all the way through, from the beginning. But this film takes it to a kind of extreme. It's about as minimal as he gets. So in some ways, it's a bit hard to understand, but he makes it clear enough, through the way he shoots a film, the way he connects the scenes with images. There are various devices he uses to, to clarify what's going on. But the film is not told in order. You have the stakeout, and then, we'll see things go back and forth story was. In that sense, can be a bit hard to follow. Okay, now you see Horibe, his partner, being shot. The action scenes are very abrupt. Very little transition, very little build-up. Suddenly, you see somebody shot. And of course, this is while Nishi is in the hospital. He's supposed to be on duty, but he's not. And he doesn't know, of course, at this point, what has happened to his partner. So this sets up another dynamic, Nishi's feelings of guilt towards Horibe. Because, of course, as a policeman, he's supposed to be protecting his partner. Instead, he's with his wife. His wife, played by the actress Kayako Kishimoto. This is her first time to work with Kitano. Although in Japan, at this time, she was very well known. And she came in to the business very young. She was an idol, singer, actor, was in many TV commercials, TV dramas. So, yeah, very well known to the Japanese audience. Again, you have this sort of scene again and again in Japanese films, medical melodramas, very popular. Kitano handles it in a very different way. He doesn't try to draw out the audience, in terms of making a big fuss, making a big scene. Nishi's getting the word that his wife has fatal leukemia. Camera's back. Discussion is low-key. This is not the way this sort of thing is handled in many Japanese films and TV dramas. So, again, from the beginning, you go back to the very beginning of Kitano's career, he tries to do everything differently from what the industry as a whole is doing. That includes the way violence is portrayed, the way the camera is used, the way the story is told. He had no formal training as a director, but when he took over from to make his first film, Violent Cop, Kinji Fukusaka was supposed to direct it, but he had a scheduling conflict. He had to retire from that film. Kitano was going to be the star. He totally rewrote the story. It was going to be a comedy. He made it into a serious drama. And going back to that film, he used very little camera movement. Just straight shots, as we're seeing here. Horibe is talking about his own family, who basically abandoned him. His wife abandoned him. So again, this sets up another contrast because Nishi and his wife are actually quite close. They don't talk, but as you will see in the course of the film, they have a very strong relationship. Horibe is the opposite. He's very forthcoming about his feelings, his situation. Nishi is not. They're very close as partners, as friends, but they're a very sharp contrast as human beings. And one commentator suggested that these two characters are aspects of Kitano. In other words, Nishi is the entertainer side, the public Kitano, who goes by the name of Beat Takeshi when he's on television, okay? And Horibe is, the aspect of Kitano that's more artistic, more serious. In other words, the film director, Kitano Takeshi. So that's, again, not something that Kitano has really explained himself, but it actually seemed to be a good explanation to me of why these two characters are so different. But why they're connected. And again, you see Horibe by the sea. The sea is another motif that appears again and again in the film. It's traditionally suggestive of eternity, of death. Horibe here is contemplating suicide. As we will see later, he's been abandoned by everyone except for Nishi. His family is gone. He's on his own. Again, there's not a lot of explanation about his internal state, but you see, again, the wave lapping over his shoe. The water is going to consume him, cover him, and that's going to be the end. He's talking to the widow of one of his partners. This is a bit confusing because you're thinking, okay, is this someone connected with Horibe? No, it's not. This is not Horibe's wife. And you think, okay, Nishi is barely reacting. He's hearing this very, can I say, woman is obviously in a bad situation. Nishi feels responsible for what happened to her husband, but he doesn't react. You think, okay, this is the cold guy, maybe. So that's, again, a kind of tension that Kitano sets up between, the exterior of Nishi. Rather, he's got the sunglasses on, you can barely see what he's thinking, feeling. On the other hand, his actions do speak louder than his words. We just saw the partner being shot. It's almost as though you're seeing Nishi thinking out loud, or Nishi thinking. These scenes just seem to come out of nowhere. Yeah, that's another one of his partners, played by Susumu Terajima. He was also shot in that previous incident, but survived. Many people who have followed Japanese films from the 1990s on are familiar with Terajima. He often worked with Kitano. Going back to the beginning, Violent Cop, Scene at the Sea, Sonatine, Getting Any, Kids Return. In other words, every single film that Kitano made up to this one. You see the drawing there, by Kitano. All of the artwork in the film is by Kitano. And I went to the set when he was shooting. He spent an entire day shooting the various drawings. And again, you see them in the film, you think, how do they actually connect with the scenes? Sometimes the connection is not so obvious. Sometimes it's a little bit clearer exactly why he put that particular painting in that scene. Okay, you see the criminal shooting both of the detectives, Nishi watching his partner being shot. Okay, here it's very clear that he's thinking about this. In other words, this is kind of a flashback in his own mind. He's not remembering what happened. But there's no explanation in the film.
ご注文はいらねえよバカ野郎。西よ、こ 今月は利子も入ってないって兄貴怒ってんだよな。ちゃんと払えよ。あ？お前だって分かってんだろうが、ヤクザのこと。元刑事なんだからよ。
Okay, this is another element that's just been introduced. The Yakuza
普通なんかじゃねえ。
is demanding that Nishi pay up. Okay, by this time Nishi has already resigned from the police. Okay, he's a civilian. You see him again stabbing the Yakuza. The violence seems to come out of nowhere. The blood splashes almost like a painting. And then suddenly we're back at the ocean. With Horibe watching the mother and her children walking along the beach, probably thinking about his own family. It's this constant back and forth, between cross-cutting between Nishi and Horibe. You get a commentary on the two characters without anything being explained. This is one scene that Kitano explained to me. The scene of Nishi taking down the punk. When he shot this scene, he knew exactly the sequence of shots he wanted. In other words, very often a director will, shoot different angles from different distances, for what they call coverage. Kitano said, no, in this scene I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. It didn't always happen that way. But again, you have this kind of very economical use of shots to create an effect that is a bit unusual. The way he cuts this sort of action scene is not the typical way for an action film. I think Kitano was trying to do a different sort of hero than what you would see in a typical Japanese police film. Showing not a lot of emotion is very typical, but I think the way he relates to people, especially his wife, is out of the ordinary. And the way he relates to Horibe, his partner, is out of the ordinary. You see, buddy movies where one partner is trying to protect the other. Nishi's attitude, though, is different. He realizes, Horibe is isolated, his family is gone. What can he do to help him? He can be there for him, but again, this relates back to Kitano himself. He sends him art supplies. Horibe becomes an artist. This is after his suicide attempt. Very depressed, again, with his family gone. We saw that earlier scene of him with the way he's washing over his feet, suggesting that he's going to be, washed away by death. So now, with Nishi's help, he starts to make a comeback. You see this night scene of Tokyo, with the camera moving, something not often done in Kitano's films. Don't see a lot of camera movement from left to right, right to left. Camera doesn't pan, it stays steady, centered. Yeah, Kitano explained that when he started making films, of course he didn't really know how to direct, beyond what he learned as an actor. So in terms of moving the camera, using the camera, he had to rely on professionals. He described his first film as kind of a series of picture postcards, the way he shot it. But he learned very quickly, and he also learned to do things his own way. In other words, he would take the advice of the professional cameraman, but as he told me, I'd let them shoot it their way, and then I try to shoot it my way, kind of on the sly. And in the end, he established his own style. The cameraman he's working with in this film, Hideo Yamamoto, had worked with Takashi Miike on several of his films. His first time with Kitano, though. Yeah, Kitano, of course, by this time was very much in charge. And he's talking about paying a debt of 4 million yen to the Yakuza. This is not explained. Okay, why did he borrow the money? We do find out there is a reason for him to do this. The Yakuza, again, treat him as a civilian. He's no longer a policeman, with a certain contempt. And Kitano's again flashing back to that scene of his partner being shot. He explodes into action. And again, one of his partners comments that when Mr. Nishi lost it was more frightening. Horibe would, what can I say, be more aggressive, when they were partners. You get that feeling Nishi was trying to be cool, holding back, but when, again, push came to shove, as in this incident, he would explode. He would react. In other words, his violence in this film comes from what other people do to him and how he reacts to that. It's not coming from him in the beginning. He's talking to Hakuryu, the enforcer of the gang. Hakuryu was a very well-known actor in gang films. He had also worked with Mike in his first film, Violent Cop, and Getting Any. He's very well known as a tough guy actor by this time. See Horibe examining the painting supplies that Nishi has sent him. It was suggested, as I mentioned earlier, that Horibe is expressing one side of Kitano's personality as an artist. He is off by himself a lot, very much involved in his art. In this film, not much of an actor, more contemplative. So that's, in a way, Kitano as a director, it's his artistic side coming out, very directly expressed in the paintings that appear throughout the film. The dynamic would seem to be, Horibe from this point on is going upwards and on to recovery. Nishi is going in another direction. I know he's getting involved with the Yakuza. Things are becoming darker for him. One character going towards the light, the other character towards the dark. But it's not quite as simple as that. Not quite as simple. Nishi is talking to the widow of his former partner, the man who was shot. Cut to another scene of a big man, played by Tetsu Watanabe, in an accident. Roughing up the other guy. Watanabe also has often worked with Kitano, many other well-known Japanese directors over the past 2 decades. By this time he had worked with Kitano in Scene at the Sea and Sonatine. He is playing the owner of a junkyard. This is his daughter, kind of a punk character. So this is the beginning of Nishi's plan to raise money. We're not told exactly what it's for. Get the idea of buying one of the cars from the junkyard owner and converting it into a police car. Okay, this is where we finally get the entire scene of the cops trying to catch the criminal who shot Horibe. Nishi talking with his partners, Nakamura and Tanaka, how they're going to do this. This sequence comes out of order. It can be a bit confusing to keep straight what's going on, but I think, again, Kitano trusts the audience to pay enough attention that by this point they know what's going on. There have been enough flashbacks. We understand, what the situation is here, and of course how it's going to transpire. What we don't see, or what we don't know, is how Nishi is going to act to catch the criminal, jumping out from behind the kiosk, trying to capture the criminal non-violently, but it doesn't work out that way. His partners jump on top of the criminal. Nishi, who's been injured or wounded, is watching them. The criminal shoots. One man is injured, the other man is killed. And this is one of two times in the film when, the usually cool Nishi reacts in a very emotional way to someone else's violence. See the criminal taking out his pistol. In slow motion, Nishi takes out his. He shoots his man. And then he empties his gun into him. We're back at the junkyard. And again, you get the feeling that Nishi has just remembered this entire incident. This is his motive for doing what he's about to do. And by the police light, the junkyard owner asks why. He says they're going to rob a bank. This is a joke, or is it? And it's a interesting reaction on the part of Watanabe. He kind of understands, I think even at this point, he understands that Nishi may be actually serious about robbing a bank. It's not quite a joke. So this is where the movie starts to become a bit of a black comedy. This one sequence of Nishi robbing the bank. Have the variation in tone. Light and dark. Some scenes very serious, very violent. Other scenes comic. One after the other, going back and forth throughout the film. And now we see Nishi for the first time, with his wife at home. She has basically stopped talking. The shock of her daughter's death is the cause. It seems it's not explained, but you can see the playful relationship they have. And the puzzle is another motif that goes throughout this latter part of the film. It's would seem to be a simple wooden puzzle, not that hard to put together, but actually it's not that easy. And what's the meaning of it? They communicate, but not with words. It's always this, they're playing games together, having little jokes together. Takes away her cigarette. At the end of her career, Kishimoto is a very vivacious, talkative person on television. So this is, again, quite a change from the image most of the Japanese audience would have of her. back to the junkyard.
これで50万高えじゃねえか。こんじゃないですよ。あっちです。どこにあるんだよ。これですよ。
You know, the junkyard owner, of course, deals with this sort of thing all the time. People bring things in that they've stolen. He knows right away. This kid is down on the level.
僕のですってこれ。藤木さん。私ですよ。私でタクシー乗れるわけねえだろ。
Kind of funny scene. So again, it reinforces the idea that you know, he knows what Nishi is really up to. But as you know, one commentator mentioned, it's almost a comic situation where you know, Nishi goes to all the trouble of buying a taxi cab, painting it, fixing it up, all to rob a bank. Now this is the you know, second crane shot, you know, we see in the film. I think Kitano uses this as a way of indicating that, you know, we're going to change gears a bit. You know, this is, you know, we're going to move into another sequence. You know, this whole sequence of the bank robbery.
それでスナックでどうしたんだよ。
いやだから醤油こぼされてでボーイがそれじゃあちょっとまずいから
てめえ醤油こぼされて10万かよこの野郎。あ？
いやアルマーニ切ったんですよ。そこに醤油こぼされて
アルマジじゃねえじゃねえかこの野郎。てめえ嘘ばっかついてる。
アルマーニですよこれ。
おいで。
いやあと
Kid is complaining about the taxi
タクシー代で10万かよ。どこまで帰んだよ。
to Nakamura,
大分まで行かなきゃいけない。
who is, of course, Nishi's partner. So this is the beginning of course, the police involvement in this bank robbery.
なめてんのかこの野郎。
You know, Nishi is, of course, dealing with the Yakuza, going to get in trouble for robbing the bank, and he has the police after him. And of course, he has to deal with his wife. So you wonder, you know, what is the motivation? Why is he doing this? And at this point, it's rather mysterious, and nothing is explained. But again, there's this contrast between Horibe, you know, starting to paint, you know, Nishi looking at the taxi cab, and of course he can't use it as it is. He has to paint himself. He has to paint the taxi cab and dress it up, you know, buy a horn to use for his fake police car. Again, you see Horibe having attempted a painting, and this is what he ends up doing. You know, this is, again, Kitano's work, animals becoming flowers. See Nishi painting the taxi cab. As a TV talent, you know, Kitano, you know, by this stage in his career, done many programs, many gags, many stunts, and they were often fairly involved, you know, in terms of, you know, building things and destroying things. You know, there's one famous series, Takeshi's Castle. You know, it's the kind of thing he would do, you know, getting physically involved in building this enormous prop for this coming bank robbery. We see Horibe imagining this painting. Yeah, this again is something you would not expect the ordinary amateur painter to undertake. You know, Kitano himself was no professional painter at all when he was making these, but he did. What can I say? Became very interested in art. You know, even on television, he hosted a program, about artworks. Famous, and of course, painted by amateurs. I think, again, people watching this film would wonder, why, what these paintings symbolize. A symbol of growth, a symbol of hope. But why on animals? It's a little bit grotesque. So again, you have something out of the ordinary artistically. Something probably only Kitano would come up with. I saw him in the studio, filming, these paintings one after the other. It took the entire day. I don't know exactly how long they spent doing it. And at the end, well, I should say after they'd been doing this all morning, they had lunch. I was sitting there at the table, with Kitano and some of his, assistants. And he had the script out. He was talking about, how are we going to end this movie? They had, of course, the script, you see at the end the girl with the kite, Nishi and his wife, about to die. And he was wondering, how do we exactly end this film? Do we move the camera up? Do we keep the camera on the girl? And, he was asking all of these people around him, how are we going to do this? And I realized at that time, this is not just a one-man show. In other words, he's collaborating with these people, and he's not exactly tearing things up and starting all over, but he does improvise. He will work from the script, but if something looks more promising, more interesting, he'll go for that. So he told me during the interview that that would cause problems. Sometimes they'd change the script. His assistant directors would have to go and say, oh, well, we're not going to use the ferry that we planned on using. Sorry, it's just something that happens. But again, the film is, more than almost any other Kitano film I can think of, structured in a certain way. But there is room, it's not rigidly structured. So he was open to suggestions, how we're going to end this. And I think he ended it in exactly the right way, tying everything up that was suggested at the beginning. We see preparation for the bank robbery. Now, this is very familiar from action films in Japan and elsewhere. The hitman or whoever spends a lot of time preparing the bullet, preparing the gun. So in this scene, we see, the Yakuza dealing with one of their clients. You see Hakuryu's enforcer character in the background, wearing the white jacket. Now, this is very typical for an enforcer in a genre film, Japanese genre film. Very often you see the hitman, dressed in white, or the enforcer dressed in white. The office for this Yakuza gang is not typical for what you would find in an ordinary gang movie made in Japan, rather modern looking. The way Kitano portrays this, cutting back from Hakuryu shooting the so-called client to Nishi practicing with his gun, ties the two characters together. It also suggests something dangerous may happen in what Kitano is about to attempt to, robbing a bank. See his wife preparing for the trip. Nishi knows that he'll have to escape after the robbery. See the junkyard owner. Again, it's a repeat of the shot earlier when Nishi was looking at the patrol car, going down the same road. And of course, the owner knows who's in that car and what he's going to do. Police siren beside him on the seat. Might even be bought off the junkyard owner. See, again, back at the junk shop, a customer looking for an item. Encountering the owner. Again, it's a bit of a comic interlude before we segue to the bank robbery. The way Kitano films this is interesting. It's done through the security camera. Sees a workman kind of laughing at him as though he knows what's going on. A little bit of black comedy there. Nishi enters the bank, but once he comes into the bank, it's all business. And he, of course, says nothing. The teller knows exactly what he wants. The other people in the bank are suspicious. Now, there's an air of tension in this scene. You're waiting for the thing to explode. The customer looking suspiciously at him. So it's played seriously, but at the same time, it's framed as not entirely serious. You had the incident, before he goes into the bank of him pointing the gun at the workman. He makes his escape. Police cars coming in the other direction. And his wife waiting for them to begin their trip. Stranded driver calling to the police car. Of course, Kitano doesn't have time for him. So again, framed by comedy in the center, of course, serious action in the bank. The junkyard owner, laughing at the headline. He should have sold it for 200,000 yen. Of course, he's talking about the taxi. The couple have begun their trip with Mount Fuji. It's lighthearted sequence. Nishi playing a bit of a joke on his wife. You can see the cards in the rearview mirror. Again, it's something you would see, the kind of humor you would see in one of Kitano's variety shows. And as Beat Takeshi, in the world of television, that's how he's known. He's not known so much as Kitano Takeshi, the film director. The puzzle, the wife can't quite figure it out. We don't know exactly how much she knows about her illness. In other words, of course, Nishi knows she's fatally ill. She herself does not say anything about that. She's not saying anything at all. It's a kind of question at this point. Yeah, this is, I believe, the scene I saw them shoot in the studio. You know, they constructed Horibei's house, or his atelier, inside the studio, and filmed him making these drawings. You know, done with marker pen, pointillist technique. Of course, that is Kitano's style. See the finished work here. A bit different from the previous ones, you know, the animals with faces of flowers. And then we see the widow of Tanaka working at the shop that sells boxed lunches. You know, so he gets a package. Not quite sure what it is. We don't know either, although we're pretty sure that it's the money that Ishii stole from the bank. See Nakamura calling her. And this is the beginning of the police investigation. You know, no matter how much they respect and love Nishi, you know, their former partner, they have to do their job. They have to go look for him after the bank robbery. This is their apartment. See the gangsters, again with the painting in the background by Kitano. This is a bit more gangster-like, you know, the figure of the death's head in a kabuki style. But still not what you would find in an ordinary gang film. Of course, these gangsters are only interested in money, you know, the so-called ideal of the gangster, you know, someone protecting the weak, standing up for his partners in the gang, respecting the boss. It's not mentioned at all. Yeah, Kitano told me he did see, you know, the old gang films, the ones where, you know, Ken Takakura is typically going in alone to take on an entire gang. He thought they were jokes. I mean, this is something that would not really happen. See Horibei looking at his package. Again, the suggestion is this is money that Nishi stole from the bank. We see, you know, Nishi and his wife after dark, you know, playing with the fireworks. Of course, this is the title of the film. Yeah, Kitano was careful to separate Hana and Bi by a hyphen. in the title, in the English version, to make it clear that, the two parts of the word had two different meanings. Hana, of course, meaning flower, bi meaning fire. Here we see the fire down. And of course that has a meaning throughout the film, not just flower and fire, but creation and destruction, growth and decline, life and death. And that segues into the painting that Horibe has made of fireworks and a family. A family looking at the stars. So its subject matter has changed to something more, you might call normal, something more positive. And we see the couple at the seaside, Horibe and his atelier. This is another incidence of the cross-cutting between Nishi and Horibe. You see the dynamic is not quite as simple as one going up, the other going down. Horibe is very much alone. Nishi is enjoying this trip with his wife. They both know this is probably the last trip. Again, the playful feeling, throughout this sequence. The car moving in front as the photograph is being taken. A typical joke from Kitano. His style of humor is very, low-key. It often, turns on, can I say, things that seem a little bit silly, but are very well timed. Here they are at the rock garden. Again, the humor is physical. He falls right into the stones. The sort of thing you would see in one of his variety shows, as one of the biggest talents on Japanese television. Back to Horibe. Looking at the spring blossoms. So the change of the seasons is another motif in this film. I have, of course, the transition to spring. See a man sitting with a sword, the sword thrust into the ground. Spring in Japan, the cherry blossom season is a time of renewal, but it's also a reminder that life is very transient. You know, the cherry blossoms last only a very short time and they're on the ground. See Nishi and his wife at a temple. You know, the father telling the boy about the bell. Kid wants to hear it. Father says no. You have to wait. He's being the adult. Nishi overhears this. Sort of laughs at what has just happened. You see the father and the boy walking towards the temple gate. And then you hear the bell. Kitano doing something a bit childish but funny. And it reaffirms the theme of this sequence, which is, you know, you have to seize life when you can, as you can, different ways, even silly ways. See, the amulet, Horibe has received this from Nishi. Nishi probably bought it at the temple we just saw. He's talking to Nakamura about his painting. Being asked about Nishi, he lies. He says, not recently. He sent me some art materials. He knows the police are after Nishi. Nakamura, though, sees the amulet. He picks up a hint from that. This is another scene when Nishi becomes violent and emotional. You know, the man looking at his wife can't understand why she's giving water to dead flowers. She doesn't answer him. His tone is mocking. She pays no attention. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, you see Nishi. Down goes the man. It's not just enough to hit him. You have to make him pay for what he's just done. And again, it's the man implying that, you know, doing something like giving water to dead flowers is a waste. It's not just an insult to Nishi's wife, it's, can I say, not giving respect to who she is, you know, someone who's dying. But Nishi is giving her this last present of a trip. And we see that the police are not the only ones on Nishi's trail. Gangsters are also after him. See the man he pushed into the water making a hasty exit. Bit of comic relief here. By this time, the playful mood has vanished, and Nishi senses something is wrong. Deciding what to do. He goes to meet the gangsters with a rock in the towel. This is, again, the cool guy Kitano played again and again. Not worried about the odds, not worried about the danger. Face twitching a bit. And then action. One gangster hides. Now, Kitano told me that, growing up in a pretty rough part of Tokyo, he would see, people fighting on the street, and very often, in fact, usually, it would be over very quickly. One guy hits the other guy goes down, and that's it. You don't have these prolonged fist fights that you see in Hollywood films. So that became his style in his own films. Usually the action scenes are over very quickly. And with a touch of black comedy. See Nakamura and his partner talking to the monk at the temple. The same shot we saw earlier of the father and the boy walking in the same direction. Again, throughout the film, you see these repeated shots linking, the different sequences together. It's interesting that Kitano's wife seemed pretty oblivious most of the time to what's going on, but once she sees these bullets, she realizes this trip is not quite as peaceful as it seems. Italian style cooking. He gets her laughing, but he never manages to get her talking. Now they're in snow country. You have the transition from, the scenes with Horibe looking at the spring blossoms. Here we are, still in winter. course, the symbolism here, and winter equals death. But at this point, they're on their way to a hot springs, trying to escape from both the police and the gangsters. Nishi's wife disappears into the snow. Again, this is the kind of thing you would see on Takeshi's Castle. Rather basic humor. And Kishimoto appeared on TV many times in this era. TV commercials, variety shows. And she was skilled at comedy. He showed that side of herself on television, and a bit in this film as well. Taking a photograph here. The person taking the photograph, the employee at the end suggests they stand together. His wife prefers to have her photo taken alone. This will be used at her funeral. Okay, this is something she's thinking about. It's an indication that she knows she's terminally ill. That's the character for Snow. We're making a transition to one of Horibe's paintings. Character for Light. Can't see the entire design yet. And then we see the two characters meeting suicide. And the camera is drawing back. And the characters for suicide are toppling over. And also you see the red spots suggesting blood. So this is an indication of Horibe's state of mind. Back to the inn in the snow country. Nishi watching his wife asleep. He has a visitor. course, way in the middle of nowhere. So who would know that Nishi is there? Probably no one he wants to see. It turned out to be the gangsters. This is the gangster that Nishi earlier stabbed in the eye with the chopsticks. Grabbing the pistol. Another indication of how tough this guy is. Walking alone in the middle of these mounds of snow towards a car. With his worst enemies inside. Being asked about the money, again, we don't really understand why he borrowed the money from the gangsters, but he did pay it back. They want more, and suddenly they're all dead. Another typical action scene in a Kitano film. The gun fires, people fall, that's the end. It's all over in seconds. And the overhead shot, the flashes of light, the camera spinning around. Very rare in a Kitano movie to see this sort of shot. But it's dramatic, a good ending to this very intense scene. Kitano's walking back to the inn. One more gangster left. It's almost like a Western showdown at this point. Is he going to draw? No. The last gangster makes his escape. Almost. Transition back to Horibe's painting. One of several in the film that link the two characters, in this case with blood. You get the impression that Horibe has been tempted. He tried to kill himself. He failed. And in this painting, you get the impression that he's still thinking about it. He splashes the blood or the red paint. It indicates that he rejects that idea. See the police investigating the scene of the crime. Gangster's dead. You have no choice but to find the killer. Camera slowly moves in and back. Detective silently looking at the dead body. The puzzle is completed. The number 5. That indicates another transition, that Nishi and his wife are moving towards death by the sea. Nishi sees the car in the background. He knows immediately who it is. The gangsters are gone. That leaves only the police, including his former partner, Nakamura. This duplicates a shot earlier of Nishi playing the card game with his wife, using the rearview mirror. And this time, of course, it's serious. He loads the gun. No transition. He's confronting his former partner. He regrets what he has to do, but he has to do it. She is asking for a moment. You see the girl playing with the kite. She is Kitano's daughter. He recruited her for this one scene. I could never live like that. That's a very interesting line. You get the feeling that they know, Nishi has no way out. He's chosen a path that can only lead to death. It's almost like an Ozu sequence, straight shots, and then Kitano tears the kite, which means, of course, they can't fly. But the girl continues to fly the kite anyway. Kind of a dark joke. At this point, when I was in the studio with Kitano and his assistant directors, and Mori-san Masayoshi Mori, who is Kitano's producer, and they were discussing how to end the film, whether to leave the camera on the girl or do something else. That's the first word she's spoken in the entire movie. Thank you. Arigato. This is the first sign of affection, physical affection, that Nishi is shown in the film, first and the last. The girl still playing with the kite. The camera moving up. The girl still playing with the kite. The camera moves towards the ocean, duplicating a shot we saw at the very beginning of the ocean, and the symbol of death, eternity. At the end, we see the sky we saw at the very beginning of the film, and we hear the sound of gunfire. And the girl looking, but the camera does not show us what she sees. Instead, the end.